Good afternoon. My name is Pamela Benson Owens, and I have the distinct honor of getting to be a moderator on what is sure to be an interesting and enlightening conversation, very presidential, with two presidents, one from a corporation and one from an HBCU. And we're going to dig in on this book today, Let Them See You. And so we're hoping you'll go along with us on this conversation where we're going to have a chance to have brave space around the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're going to jump right in with letting our guests introduce themselves, and then we're going to start asking some questions about the book. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hello, Pam. Doing well.
Good. Would you introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll jump in?
Sure. So first off, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for Huston-Tillotson for hosting this wonderful event. I am Matt Gallagher, and I'm president and CEO of a publicly traded energy company called Parsley Energy. And we drill wells in West Texas, trying to supply energy to the nation.
Wonderful. And President Pierce Burnette?
I want to welcome Matt to Huston-Tillotson University. I really like what he did to wave to the camera. I'm going to remember that. That was a really great move. I'm Colette Pierce Burnette. I'm the president and chief executive officer of Huston-Tillotson University, a historically black college, Austin's only and Austin's oldest institution of higher learning. I'm very proud to serve the genius generation right here in East Austin. So welcome.
So this is a unique opportunity that doesn't happen often, where an organization and the HBCU are coming together to have a brave conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion based on the book that we all read, Let Them See You. It's an opportunity to have shared conversation and to really see each other. But before we get started, it's no secret that social justice has bubbled up over the last several months as it relates to George Floyd. So as we get ready to have this conversation, let's set the stage behind, how did we get in this space together today? Matt?
Well, I think the phrase bubbling up hits home with me, and I was probably cruising along uncertain as to how large of an issue was really upon us. And you've mentioned the words journeys. This is going to be a journey for me. It's very early on to it, but for work I was asked to get a Twitter account. I'm not big on social media. I've never had a Facebook account, and I joined Twitter. And I remember that day of the video popping up on my feed of George Floyd and the atrocity that happened. And right then and right there, I decided that I'm woefully behind in my understanding, and something has to change. And that's where I started my journey that day. And I wish it was sooner, but it's been a unfolding process. And it was clear as could be that we have issues that we've got to work on, and if we come at it from the right approach, and I like how you said a brave space, it's going to take some introspection. It's going to take a lot of courage in this country, but this country has courage, and I know we can do it. So that really was the tipping point for me.
Absolutely. I love that. And so for you, in a very different space, which is what I love about conversations about like this, we get to have diverse thought and different entry points. So for you, as you saw a bubbling up and something that you have been literally spending your life addressing, what came up for you?
I really appreciate what Matt said about the Twitter moment. My son says that the best invention for black men was the cell phone camera, because it puts it right in our face. And when we were first contacted by your firm, we get a lot of people that are interested in talking to the institution. And particularly after the incident with Mr. Floyd, the interest was, it raised, but it was not sincere. and it was not intentional. And that's what causes fatigue in this battle for civil rights and social justice, is there's so few people that are intentional about dismantling racism. So the sincerity in the conversation, not just to give to our COVID-19 support fund, investing in our students, but just to have a very authentic conversation and to be humble. And I really appreciated that Pam said about brave space, because we always talk about safe spaces, and there are no safe spaces. But a brave space is where you create an environment where people can be vulnerable and have very candid conversations about their exposure to racism, their experiences, et cetera, which is something that, you know, comes out in the book, that you bring your whole self to it, like we were talking about before the taping, and that you allow yourself to recognize your own issues. So in our conversations, to get to this space, to read a book together and to have a book club, is you bring yourself, I bring myself, you bring your experiences as a white male, I bring my experiences as a Black female. We're very different paths, but we're more alike than we are different. And the more we have conversations about that, the more we start dismantling systemic racism. And I would like to add one thing, where some people walk around it, some people talk about it, some people don't want to talk about it, and then some people take a sledgehammer and really hit it and really want to dismantle it through conversations, and authentic conversations, and with action to it. So as the president of Historically Black College, you know, my work, my passion is with education as the great equalizer. So my students are getting an education to equalize things in their lives. By the nature of who they were, what zip code they were born into, the color of their skin, their family wealth, all those things that come isms in their lives, their education has an opportunity to eradicate some of those and give them an opportunity. So with collaborations with entities like yours, those collaborations are, I say this a lot, we go fast alone, but we go farther together by creating those brave spaces and doing something really, really grand to really have a conversation about the brutality of systemic racism.
So let's jump in on this book. A whole lot packed in this book. I read it and I listened to it so I could hear the voice of the author, younger generation, right? And there's a lot in here. He speaks to the emerging leader, he speaks to the executive, he speaks to the corporation, all rolled up in one. And the other part of this is that in this day and age, on any given organization, you've got 5 generations spanning, right? From traditionals on up. 2008, the economic downturn in 2008 made the traditional demographics stay in the game probably longer than expected. And with that comes diversity on diversity, ecosystem within ecosystem. And I think that's why this book was so overwhelming, because A, the topic is big, but also the dynamics within organizations are fluid and different depending on who's in them. So what I'd like to ask you first is, if you could, in 3 words, describe your reaction to this book, what would your 3 words be? Matt?
Okay. I might have to take phrases.
Are you going to hyphenate?
I'm going to hyphenate, yes. But, you know, one thing that I took away from this was shining bright, shining through. And, you know, the recognition of your own diversity and strengths. And the corporate jungle is a minefield. So it's just really great, you know, candid talk about how to navigate that minefield, and then putting this skill set on top of it is something that is good for everyone, and especially good, I can imagine, for people of color. And then the second part is I took away, I connected with the chapters about being an athlete, you know, at work, and had experiences with that growing up, and the trials and tribulations you see throughout sport, but yet leaning on others and your network, and really flexing on those fronts. So those are a couple phrases as opposed to words.
I'm going to let you have it. I'm going to let you have it.
You.
I know
Yes,
that's hard. I know it's hard.
You know, since this is a journey for me, coming through the overprint of the book did make me recognize the challenges facing, uniquely facing the BIPOC community at every single turn. And that is the first time I've read through it through that lens. And so just I got the feeling of a blanket that on top of you, and I could palpably feel it as I was reading. And so there was a feeling that I had never felt before as I was reading through the book. So those were three big takeaways for me.
Wow, thank you. I love that. President Pierce Burnette.
That's a reflection on your humanity, because people who are humane read things like that and have that experience, and recognizing that you're seeing it through that lens for the very first time, and honoring and respecting and listening to that lens, I think is very important. My 3 words would be, I'm going to say the 3 words and then I'm going to do like Matt and explain them, if that's
Please
okay. So it's persistence, youth, and patience. Persistence, because that's a continuing theme in the book, is that it's not a one and done. It's not a panacea. It's not, lightning's going to strike and all of a sudden we won't have these challenges in the workplace. It's we have to continue to be persistent and consistent in that persistency. And then the youth is, his lived experience is very different than my lived experience. And my lived experience is very different than my parents' lived experience. So every movement has the energy of the youth and the expertise of the wise. So I see he straddled it a little bit in different parts of the book, of having his youth and almost a little bit of naivety of how he was able to do things in his navigation of his corporate life that I would not have been able to do, because I'm 62, so I'm in that era of being the next generation for Porter Braswell. And then the last one would be patience, because you can get fatigued at this work. And the leader can say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, which is back to persistence. It's too hard. I'm getting too much pushback. It's too hard to continue to push forward or to pull forward. And you have to be, have that patience to continue to work towards this every moment, every day of your work life as well as your life. Because it doesn't stop. Life doesn't stop when we go home. And life doesn't start when we come to work. So it has to be in every facet of our lives that we're conscious of this.
Absolutely. I think it's really great, Matt, that you were talking about like this awakening as you're reading. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, you said naive, you used that word for him. I think one of the things that was interesting about this book is this process of turning to wonder and curiosity. He had this, and so I was listening to you and thinking to myself, Matt, that it's, sometimes people consider vulnerability to be a weakness, but it really is a strength, and how you can kind of turn to wonder and get curious. And in this space, when we start talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, often what happens, which stops it from becoming part of the ethos, is that people get caught in judgment and discomfort, and you spin and then you just stop. So I think there's such an opportunity, and you two are modeling that you can have brave space conversations and come out on the other side of it bigger and better. And so as 2 leaders, I want you to talk a little bit about the narrative that kept coming up in this book was that there's this handbook that comes out of HR, and then there's like the handbook, which is the cultural norms of an organization or an institution. But then there's an additional handbook for people of color, specifically Black people. There's like a handbook, HR, like the non-career shortening handbook. Then there's the cultural norm handbook, how you know which coffee to use and right? There's these things, the acronyms of an organization that I'm sure you experience at Parsley. We have a long list here at HT of acronyms. And then there's this other handbook that happens that's this additional, maybe weighted blanket that happens for employees of color. So talk a little bit about how you experienced those things as you read them, as like there's this other piece that comes with the territory of being an employee of color in an organization. Give some feedback about like how you experienced him explaining that in the book. Matt, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I see it kind of like a microclimate. Like if you get onto your weather app and you see if there's a challenging condition coming through, it's easy to predict. But you have these little flare-ups or these ecosystems that can have some negativity, and that's and you can't see it in a broad forecast or in any of these handbooks. And those are the things that are clear that they're more prevalent through reading, and they're trying to give skill sets to navigate through that. And in a book, it gives you, don't do this, I just did this. Well, people have had a lot of time to script that out. There was probably an editor in this book, and the harsh reality is it's not that easy. But it's a great tool and a resource to say, okay, I'm going to have to practice this, and if we do try to create a brave environment and we set the tone from the top at the cultures of these companies, it's a chip away effort. And so I think there's a tool and a skill set presented in here that has to be refined. I would just caution that some of them seemed a little bit too quick to say, don't do this, just do that, and it worked for me. And I think it's a real challenge, and kind of like you were saying, the chip away effort, and I think you got to keep chipping away.
Yeah, it's hard to standardize it because nobody's monolithic, right? But I understand for purposes of a book, you have to try to give it some anchoring. So absolutely, I love that analogy. And also, the thought of the athlete made me keep thinking about building muscle memory, right? When I hired my 6th trainer after I fired the other 5, when I had to learn to plank, right? That first day was bad. But then after a while, my muscle memory kicked in. And so I think it's that intentional action around doing this work and creating brave space. Talk a little bit about you and how the handbook, how have you navigated that, and how did it show up for you in this book?
I do a 10-second plank. That's it, and most of that's most of that is setting up to do the plank. I count while I'm setting up. I have a corporate background, so for the first 23 years of my career, even 24, 25 years of my career, I was corporate. I worked at the Washington Post and Procter & Gamble, and I navigated my way as, I'm an engineer, undergrad, so I navigated my way as a Black female really naively until I saw the movie Hidden Figures. And when I saw the movie Hidden Figures, which is about 3 Black female engineers who went to historically Black colleges, and I did not go to a historically Black college. I went to Ohio State, a predominantly white institution. And when I watched that movie, I realized that my navigation as a Black woman in the corporate spaces, I took so for granted without recognizing what those before me had to go through. They couldn't drink out of the same coffee pot. They couldn't use the same restrooms. They were smarter than some of their counterparts, but they weren't respected as such. And I walked into Ohio State as an engineering student, only Black to graduate in my class from a large institution like that. And then I walked into my first position at Procter & Gamble as though someone owed me something, where I owed something to someone. So and that's why I transitioned to higher education eventually, for all the reasons I said before, because of my own journey and the own realization that if people don't continue to fight this fight, we will slide backwards very easily. The democracy as we know it, that Black people helped to build, quite frankly, because we were fighting other people's wars for freedom, or we didn't have freedom in our own country. So we continue to chisel away at that, to use that word again. And the subtitle of this book, The Guide for Leveraging Your Diversity at Work, I think makes it a handbook, because he himself is calling it a guide, and no guide fits all. So my environment, in fact, we talked about this in my cabinet meeting this morning. Pam was saying that we're doing the typing, and my provost read the book, and he talked about how he made him think about diversity in our own space. My cabinet is all Black, but we're from very different walks of life. I have a mid-30s person, myself, who's a vice president. I have my provost, who is from the continent of Africa. I have Pam, who grew up in Milwaukee, who was born in Milwaukee and then grew up here in Austin, lived in East Austin quite a while. My controller's from Houston. I'm first generation. So we all bring that diversity into the conversation. So there is beauty in that diversity, and that's important on how we operate. Now, the beauty of being a president at a historically Black college is I don't have to be on as a Black person all day. And the beauty of my students experiencing it, the guidebook, if you will, is they can just come and be a person. They don't have to be the Black person or the brown person or the white person. They could just be the student and come into their own greatness without a language of, no language of lack. And so in corporate spaces, we have these biases where the guidebook is unspoken, where people think less of you in their mind because of the color of your skin. So leaders have to set an atmosphere that that's not okay, and that we are all equal, and we all are bringing something skill set to the table, irrespective of our backgrounds. And Pam knows this. I'm not a fan of the words diversity and inclusion. I believe very strongly that those have become comfort, peanut butter, and jelly feel-good words. And in my walks here in Austin, diversity and inclusion generally means white females. So when people talk about diversity, that's what they're really talking about. It's like a code word. It really is about civil rights and social justice. And my experience as in corporate was I was often had to be 3 times better than my counterparts so that I could just have the same opportunities for advancement in my career. And I didn't get it in that way at that time, but that does something to your psyche when you're living in a space like that. And I just happened to be from a family, a village, that I was taught that you could do anything. Like my dad has a 6th grade education. He's from Mississippi, and college was the 13th grade. So like, you're gonna do these things. And when we have those kind of expectations of the people who work for us, the students who go to school, where I'm employed, when we have those kinds of expectations in the environment, the guidebook will start to destroy those biases when we call them out for what they are. As long as we just kind of do the peanut butter and jelly, soul food, feel good, it doesn't really change anything. And this nation was lulled to sleep in the 1960s because we reached equality, so I can vote. So everything must be okay. Then it got hardened because we had a Black president. So we must be in this post-racial society. But it kept being buried and buried and buried because people are dancing around it. So we cannot really have a breakthrough unless we really face it, just like in any relationship, you face it head on. And the final thing I want to say about the book, the title of the book, Let Them See You, he's telling people of color, like, be good, be excellent, be the best, let them see you. And I kept getting it confused in my mind with Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. And that's about the Central Park 5 and a tragic story about 5 young Black men whose lives were destroyed because they were wrongfully accused. And so the whole thing of Ava DuVernay's storytelling, the documentary, which is a true story, is about when they see us. Like, see me as a person. Like, respect me as who I am. So I kept confusing that. And like, I kept saying, I'm reading When They See Us. And then I would look at it, it's like, no, that says let them see you. I can't read. Let them see you. So because it's the same thing, just like, I want my students to be seen. I want them to have an opportunity. I want their brilliance to shine through, their genius to shine through. And that is something that is not natural in this country. And it has to be made natural.
Absolutely. Whoa, a lot there from both of you. So when I started my day this morning, my spouse said, hey, what's up first on the schedule? And I said, oh, uncomfortable conversation with a white man. And really, truly. And so part of that is just holding space for it being okay to be a little uncomfortable, because I think we just have to just hold that and be okay with that. But I also think, as we're talking about this book and, even the title, Let Them See You, depending on what lens you're coming from, it's like how much, right? And that's for everybody. That's for everybody in this uncomfortable space. And so there's such an opportunity to not try to do this brave space work with shame, blame, and guilt, right? That becomes really hard. That's a stopgap too. And so in the book, it talks a lot about bringing your whole self. And so I want both of you to just explore, like, how do you define bringing your whole self to the workplace? Like, what are the things that Matt, what do you do to bring your whole self? Like, you're the president, so it starts from you. Like, what's the signals that you do and feel comfortable? And when I say, Matt, how do you bring your whole self to work? And then President Pierce Burnette, I want you to answer that too, because I think that's somewhat of a problematic statement in the book. It's like, bring your whole self to work, to what end? Yeah. Right? Like, we couldn't even, that's book 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So how do you define bringing your whole self to Parsley every day?
Well, and it goes against some of what's more recently being classically trained when you have to go through annual kind of liability discussions, HIPAA discussions. We don't want to talk about, everybody's not quite comfortable with their own personal health issues. So, right. So what is your whole self? Right. But it's all coming with you.
But let's talk about the cultural norm in the U.S.
Yes.
For a minute. We have cultural norms. We know we eat soup with a spoon. We know we're supposed to tip after a meal, right? We know that when we get done with a call, we say goodbye. And we also know when people ask us how we're doing, we don't say all of it. That's a United States cultural norm. We know those things. That comes built in. So when we say bring your whole self to work, Matt, how would you define that as a leader of a company?
So we try to have an open platform, but there are still some constraints. But I personally, I talk a lot about my family and about how I've learned things from the challenges of raising 2 energetic boys. And you come from a company where 500 people listen to a plan that you put forth, and then you get home and 2 people aren't listening to that plan. So,
they don't care about
yes. And people love hearing that, because then they go, well, okay, maybe now I don't have to listen to them. If those 2 get away with it, I can too. And then it breaks down, and we have some discussions. So we have a lot of humility and some soft joking about the challenges that we cross. But going back to the previous question, I was kind of rejuvenated or excited to hear about the performance implications of, and I'm with you. The word diversity is just not enough, and then there's a lot of requirements as a public company that you publish things, and then reading this book and going back at our own company's publishing, we have zero Black management. So you take this book and you recognize the power and the performance that can come through real diversity of thought, of lived experiences. And then another part of it is, it doesn't just happen by accident. There is nothing that I have seen that was an intentional exclusion, but I'm replaying the clock, and there's nothing that I've seen that's been an intentional outreach. And now we got to shift the narrative, because it's kind of clear as day when we talk about the blanket, and one, we have to recognize it, and 2, we have to work harder and it doesn't mean you just, in my mind, it doesn't mean that tomorrow job posting is going to be out there, but it means it takes time and to talk about it and really be intentional about it. And guess what? There's a financial reward. McKinsey and Company did a white paper on it, on a research paper that says that better financial performance, and that's, as businesses, that's what we're here for also. So that's encouraging. I mean, there are rewards at the end of this, in multiple different ways.
Yes, the business case is solid.
Yes, yeah, business case is solid.
But it's enormous, because it's not going to be a one size fits all, right? So how do you go about the definition of bringing your whole self to work? I can't wait to hear this answer.
The reason Pam is saying this is because I do bring my whole self to work. And as the leader, you set the tone. So when I'm worried about, have angst about something, not holding onto my mustard seed correctly, I feel that happening on the campus, even though I don't think I'm acting that way, but you are. And I think that vulnerability is one of the key elements of an effective leader. I believe very strongly that you need to be vulnerable with your people. People need to see you as human. They don't need to see you as quote unquote perfect. So I bring my whole self, my experiences, my lived experiences, my thoughts. I've learned to try and temper myself such that I need to listen more to people with the intention of hearing what they're saying, because sometimes in my own vulnerability, bringing myself to the whole thing, like I'm too much in there. So I have learned that I need to step back a little bit and let people be themselves. While I'm being myself, I need to encourage everybody else to be themselves. So I just think that that's just like one of my most vulnerable moments here on campus was we had someone to just have some very untrue, terrible things to say about campus, and I took them personally. And in a meeting that I was having with my leadership team, I went to say it, and I could feel that I was going to cry. And as a woman leader, you know, the handbook says, don't cry. But my body and my heart was saying, this is painful. And I think that was a turning point in my leadership. That was early on in my tenure here, because people saw that I do care deeply, passionately about the institution. And I wasn't this kind of wall that didn't have passion about it or vulnerability about it. The one thing I wanted to really lift what you said about bringing people of color into the space in leadership positions when there was none. You want that person to be successful. So one of the major challenges that the nation had with affirmative action was people would say, oh, you just got that job because you were Black, because we had to hire a Black person. And that's very hard for having been an affirmative action hire, that's very hard for the person, because affirmative action just gets you the interview. It doesn't get you the job. You still have to have the credentials to do the job. But when you put me in this environment, that's where the inclusion comes in. You want the environment to be healthy and not toxic for the person to be successful, for the entity to be able to benefit from them. And if you don't set that environment up, then that's why so many entities have challenges. And then they say it becomes about the person, like they didn't fit in, as opposed to, no, you didn't fit in, because you're not really in an environment that you really want diversity in this space. No matter what the diversity is, we clearly focus mostly on race. But if you have a hard time keeping Black people or keeping, you know, people of color in your organization, it's not the people, it's you as an organization. So you have to till the field, you know, thatch the lawn. It's going to look ugly at first, but then it's going to come up beautiful, because you're going to have planted these seeds that are going to really grow this really wonderful organization. And it takes time and leadership to do that. And if I could just say one more thing about my experiences as a vulnerable leader here in Austin. I have been troubled by Austin's response to the university's efforts of fundraising during this time frame, because Black Lives Matter in public, and then when you go to make the ask, it doesn't really matter. And that's because people talk a good game, but then when it comes down to it, it's not a good game. It is a game. It's not intentional. And that's what I meant early at the top of the hour when we started talking about intentionality. And when you're a Black person, particularly a Black woman, women have this instinct, I believe, that you have this radar. And when someone is sincere about the conversation, your radars are like vibing. And then when something is not sincere, and Parsley approached us. So when something is not sincere, your radars go boop, 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 boop. So when we when we got off the Zoom call, hung up the phone, we got off the Zoom call, Pam and I had a meeting after the meeting, which we do in our fundraising efforts. And I don't remember our exact words, but it was something like, this is real.
Good.
Something's gonna come of this. This is real.
Hope it was vibing.
So
It was.
it was vibing. And that's unfortunately abnormal. That's not normal. And in a town like this with such prosperity, in my mind, when COVID hit and we decided to do virtually online, and we said we need to raise $1.6 million to be able to provide my students with technology to close that barrier, in my naive, vulnerable mind, I thought, oh, we'll be able to do this because I've been all over the city. My faculty are excellent. The institution is excellent. Our brand is raised. This won't be that hard. I get 5 companies to give what's a drop in the bucket for them, and we're at $1 million. And 8 months later, we just broke the $1 million. So that's a lived experience. That's a real experience. And if someone had told me that was going to be our experience, there's so much packed in that. And just some of the conversations that we've had with people, and the dancing for our supper that we have to do to prove ourselves, it's never enough. I mean, and that is what this book is about how you have to go let them see you. And at what point do you become fatigued from letting them see you? Now, this institution is 145 years old, so clearly we've been working at this, letting them see us for a very long time. And we're going to continue to do it, but you can become this activism fatigue after a while.
Absolutely. I love
That's
that.
frustrating to hear too. And in this city, you kind of unique to this state, the discussion is more prevalent. There's a lot of banners hanging across the roads. There's a lot of paintings, and then where do you actually? And it starts with the individual. How do you treat another human being across from you? And then it expands into how do you take it into your work life? You bring in your whole self, and then it expands to how do you outreach and interact with other organizations? And it sounds like there's some broken links in there, but we're happy to put the banners out as a city, and we can, there's just so much that we can do better. But this book is a good highlight to, it's a long road, but we got to start taking the steps.
And it takes the courage of a young person to, I have a lot of hope in young people because they're fearless in this work. And we try to, like with Black Lives Matter movement, and it's a movement, was to suppress, even Black people. It's too radical. It's too much. And it became political and became associated with things that are not true about the movement. So we need to lift young people. And so even in your organization, it's not about racist people, it's about racist systems. And it's dismantling those systems. And when we kind of get through that, there are racist people of all hue, all skin colors. It's a kind of a biases are innate in us. And some of us take it too far. So when we kind of continue to mine that youth and that energy, we will eventually start to see things, the systems change. But it takes a lot of work to do that. And you have to do it in every aspect of your life. You can't just kind of do it at work on the paper because it doesn't become real. And one thing I encourage people to read about our history as a nation. The more informed you are about that history and how these systems came to be, it's very eye-opening that you see as a nation, this happened over time, and it just doesn't dismantle itself immediately. So people have to really, truly read about the history of this country in particular.
Absolutely.
Which makes it great. It's what you said earlier about the courage as a nation. So
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that the conversation that we're having right now often gets stifled and stopped due to discomfort. And there's a lot packed in this book. And one of the things that kind of, as I'm listening to you, Matt, and I'm listening to you, President Pierce Burnette, that you're modeling beautifully is that it would be easy to stop this conversation if we were clinging to making it personal and fixing it to goodness and comfort, right? Which is what happens usually in white spaces. It's like we start having this conversation. It's not an attack on goodness. It's not an attack on somebody's comfort. It's about systemic racism and the power it has. So, Matt, I'll start with you. Tell me, like, what is it, or tell us, is there one thing in this book that you were just like, man, that one is hard to hear. Like, that one is not my favorite part. It's not me. Like, come on, because I do think it's important to note to you that you're probably thinking that you sound and are operating in this space like all your white counterparts. I need to let you know that you're not. It's a unique, it's the stuff coming out of your mouth is why we responded the way we did after the call. So I want you to think about like what one part was like, man, that one was a doozy. And then which one gave you hope or at least cautious optimism. And then I want you to think about which one, even though you've operated in the space, continues to be a doozy, and which one gives you cautious optimism.
Well, I'm physically sweating right now because of thinking about how to tackle this, and it's touched on in this book, but we're here, so
right.
I want to, why else? Maybe we're taking too big of a swing here, but the other concept, and we're talking about systematic racism, and then the concept about white privilege, and I'm really early on that because, so one place through watching a lot of YouTube videos, TED Talks, additional reading, I've gotten to a better place on understanding that. And in the book, it helped me. It said, regardless of your political affiliation, white men felt uncomfortable when presented with certain situations. Both sides, they clammed up. And so I said, okay, that's a natural response. And I connected a bridge here. Okay, white privilege, I felt like a pause moment. I thought that it was saying you cannot be happy of your heritage. So that was the initial roadblock for me. And the more I've learned about it, it's not talking about that. It's recognizing that there are tailwinds in our sails. And I think for anyone to argue factually against that I'd love to see that argument, because I've had a lived experience, and when I replay the tape, even with police officer interactions and different things, it's just very, very mundane and very different. And I don't have a negative lived experience through that same conditional output. So it helped me understand that it's more about recognizing some of the tailwinds that you've had, or the little lift ups. If you get out off the path a little bit, maybe there's some guardrails that can help you. And it's quite the opposite for people of color. It's there's no guardrail, and then once you get off, and no one's even throwing a potential lifeline. It's maybe expected, and so reframing it that way, and then the concept of letting them see you and shining through is so refreshing to me, that we don't have to say it's all the same. And then those two logical arguments really land well with understanding white privilege. So, I am proud of my own personal heritage, but I'm fully recognizing that that there's some benefits that I've had that others have not. And And so I'm sure still even that, isn't quite all the way there. But those were an uncomfortable moment, just going through that concept, still kind of working through it and what it means, and then how to just have a good conversation about what the differences are. There's the concept of allies, and the concept of is someone really looking to someone else to be helpful, and how's the right way to approach that? And there's no perfect answer there either. So those are some of the uncomfortable, the more of the hot points that early on in this summer were walls for me, and trying to get through.
Yeah, I love that you're tackling white privilege. It's big. And again, it's not about goodness, it's about conditioning and exposure. And so it's a both and conversation in a world that makes us be either or, right? You can be proud of who you are and recognize, and I love your analogy, that there are tailwinds. You two have that in common. Both of you are clearly analogy people. She sits in that space to make a point. You guys will be longtime presidential friends because you use analogies, she uses analogies. I just want to point that out. Because No, I'm not. She gets ready to give us a concept. It's going to be about a fish, a mammal, a tree. She's used trees to make her point. I noticed that you do that too. I love that you two can always speak hey, that's a common language right there that you should build on. So for you, what was a doozy that just, again, is like, that continues to be a doozy? And then what part of it gave you some hope or was refreshing?
I'll do the hope refreshing part first. It's his consistent thread about patience in the work and continue. Like, he doesn't, the thing I appreciate, he doesn't hide behind, if you do all these things in this book, your operation's going to be fully diverse and inclusive, and everybody's going to lock arms, sing kumbaya, and skip off into, wonderful racism-free land. He's consistent in that message. And that was refreshing for me. I was a little worried for a little while, but then he kind of keeps bringing it back. There was nothing in there that made me feel uncomfortable, because I like being a Black woman. Like, I love it. I love the privilege. We don't talk a lot about the privilege of Black people. We are not, it's very different. The word privilege means something very different. But I love the family that I was born into. I love learning about the history of my family and of my people. And it makes me proud of where we've come in my lifetime, and let alone in my parents' lifetime. So I didn't see a lot of that in the book about, like, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, in the words of the great philosopher James Brown. But that was a little, like, I wanted him to be a little more aggressive in that way, to be proud of who we are, everybody, and bring that to the table, a greatness. So I can't think of anything that was disheartening for me. I appreciated the book. I did think it was naive in some respects, and that's his experience. So it's unfair for me to call it naive, because that's his experience. And he's being vulnerable and sharing his experience. So from my perspective, there are things that aren't in there, but that's my experience. And the more we learn, that's what I was saying earlier about bringing my whole self to it. I have to step back and see it through that person's lens. That's growth for me as a Black female leader. One thing I would say about when I finished the book, I listened to the end. So, because I like hearing it in the author's voice. One thing I will say, he sounded tired at the end. So I don't know if that's from reading the book, but I'm sure they do it in several sessions. But I think it was like he had birthed something. Like, this is it. So people either take it or they don't. And the book has become popular, so I think more people are reading it to take from it as you wish, as you will.
Well, I think part of it is this is racially traumatizing when you have to talk about it from a lens and lived experience. This is not fun. This is not fun stuff all the time, right?
And people need to realize that it's true. I have had experiences here as the president of a university where I have been reminded of where people perceive my place to be. Like, I can tell you very specific stories about times that I've been treated less than. And then when someone finds out that I'm the president of a university, sometimes because I'm the president of this university, I can still be treated less than, and I can feel it. So it's real. It's not something that's happening over there. It's happening to people on a daily basis. We're just now, and I really appreciate this because of the trauma that the trauma that the world, the pandemic sat us still, and then the civil unrest disrupted everything. We were forced to see it. We couldn't hide from it. So it's going to make, in the crises will come some good from this if we work at it. So I feel hopeful. It's hard, but I feel very hopeful in that respect. And reading books like this, that's the educator in me, reading documents like this, reading books like this, it helps you to continue to lean into doing the hard, what I call heart work.
I love that. So in true tradition, we're getting to the end here. And so for the last question, and I'm going to call you President Gallagher, President Pierce Burnette, because you are on HT turf, and that's what we do here. We bring our full selves and our full titles and our full names, which is a cultural respect and nuance. As we close out this conversation, and you think about the fact that you've just modeled here, so thankful to Parsley, so thankful to HT that you've just modeled really clearly what we probably need more of, right? Doing and modeling. If you could give advice, and I said, now you got to give that advice to the emerging leader, the seasoned executive leader, your employees, and your organizations as a whole, what advice would you offer to people who are trying to enter into this discussion around inclusion? It's huge, it's big. It was slammed all into this book, but we all know it's bigger than ourselves, right? So what advice would you offer in the seats that you sit in, from the lens for which you see from? What advice would you give?
I want people to take something tangible away from it, but as you were asking the question, I thought of a discussion we just had with our employee base, and Abraham Lincoln had a quote, and he said, the great thing about the future is it comes at you one day at a time. And having this conversation, if you take it one step at a time, we can build a great future. And really leaning on some of the handbooks, or some of the advice of the handbook. Take little snippets. Don't think it's going to be all rainbows and unicorns. It's a tough world out there. Put an overprint on that of a business climate when everybody has their own ambitions, equally tough. But take it one day at a time and let yourself shine through. Don't be afraid of speaking what's important to you.
I love that. I love that. President Pierce Burnette, what's the advice for all of that?
It would be to do your self-work, and recognize that we're not all Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincolns, Angela Davises, John Lewis's, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but we are citizens with spheres of influence. And if you work on your sphere of influence, and you're conscious of working on yourself to come to connect with your own stuff, then we will start seeing that ripple out into families, into communities, into cities, into states, into the nation, into the fabric of who we are as a nation. So you have to do your self work and be true to your authentic self, and do that work and stay committed to persevere, to continue to dismantle this blanket that is over all of us. And I'm going to use that tail wins in the sail. The first time I say it, I'll say Matt Gallagher said it, but after that, it'll be I said it. I really like that
presidential privilege? Absolutely.
Because that's so true. I could see that. It's so real.
So we made it. Nobody was harmed or scathed in the making of a brave conversation with two presidents. And I think you heard their advice that you have an opportunity to learn and read and grow, to listen actively, and then to act. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining us. And we are here now. And anytime you get to be in presidential powerhouse space, it's going to be good. And we have them here with us to continue to answer some questions that you have. And we already have some. And they have agreed. They said, no question is too hard. That's what it takes when you're leading in brave space. So I'm going to start with you, Matt. One of our viewers asked, how should an individual contributor who's not in a formal leadership role help hold her organization accountable for addressing systemic racism? They are coming out of the gate hard, aren't they?
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I think even if it's not a formal leadership position, everybody needs to take leadership in their own role. And you have a sphere of influence among your peers. That's the easiest place to start. Those right when it happens in the book, it says, don't say they're wrong, but correct. It's okay to correct. So that would be step one. Just when an incident happens, correct someone. And then especially around your sphere of influence. And then that reputation builds and they know where you're coming from, that this is a respectful correction and it's needed. So it starts at every level in an organization and everybody can be a leader. So I'd correct when something gets out of whack.
I think that's great. Okay, President Pierce Burnette, you want to tackle that question? You want me to bring you in on that question again? It's deep.
It's very deep. And I don't remember Matt and I saying no question was too hard.
I don't remember
that in.
Yes.
But this is a brave space. I wholeheartedly agree. I think everyone needs to model behavior. And you have to find your own threshold when you're in an organization and you're modeling behavior. And sometimes it feels risky for your own career progression. And we want to retreat. So you have to find where that threshold is, how long you want to tolerate that behavior in an organization and continue to be a part of that organization. Once you continue to model and you don't see that there's change. And it's just like anything else when you work in a space where you're not comfortable for whatever reason, then you decide when it's an opportunity for you to, it's the best decision for you to go somewhere else. So you have to model that behavior and be brave about it and watch to see if it's being modeled by those who are in fact the quote unquote leaders, because everybody is a leader in their own space within an organization. Everybody has a responsibility to lift the organization. And oftentimes you have the top leader that's saying, I want to have a diverse, equitable, inclusive community. And then you have the middle that does not. And then you have the people who are doing the real work that are. And so sometimes that has to be meshed together so that then the culture of the entire organization changes.
Absolutely.
And that takes time. It is a dismantling. It's not immediate.
Wonderful.
This is a pretty important question. And you mentioned some things that popped in, new ideas. I kind of live by the 2 strikes, you're out rule. Start with 1 strike and then communicate initially when it happens. That's the 2nd strike. And then the 3rd strike, if you say it again and they haven't changed, you need to use your resources within a company as well. And so we're talking about the business climate here, and you have to lean on proper channels like HR. If you've said your first piece, use your resources within your company too, because there's those situations where communication isn't getting all the way through the organization. You have to use the resource available to you.
Absolutely. I hope people are hearing that. Sometimes people think there's an assumed constraint, but we have 2 top leaders giving that advice. And I think it's great. We're not talking about the cappuccino. We're talking about the foam. The foam has said, utilize HR if needed. I love that. Okay, here's the next question. Did either of you experience any pushback from other people when you considered having such a difficult conversation so publicly? Matt, I'll start with you.
I'd say the pushback might be coming. Have not received any initial pushback. I think people are open and altruistic and want the best. But I think when you start unpacking and really talking through what it takes to get there, there's going to be some people that are a little bit uncomfortable, even within our organization. And then that will manifest itself through some blowback, and hopefully it crops up and we can talk about it and talk through it. So to date, no, we just kind of marched forward, but I fully expect it may be coming and we'll address it when it does.
Love it. President Pierce Burnette.
In this work, you always will find the naysayers. Why are you doing that? Nothing's going to change. And I don't believe that. So I have to follow my own instincts, where I do believe that conversations, events, activities, moments like this do affect change. And like we said earlier, I'll just keep doing this in my sphere of influence to hopefully begin to visibly see the dismantling in my own lifetime. So you naturally get people say, I don't know why you do that, because nothing's going to change. It's been happening for 400 years. Why do we think something's going to change? Mm-hmm. And I do believe that we are at a pivotal moment in history where, was what you were saying earlier about the pressure and the heat. Mm-hmm. And we have to continue with the pressure and put some heat in there, and things do then to morph into a better quality of life for the entire community.
Great. So this next question is going to be such an opportunity for some edutainment, because I think you're going to be able to answer and educate, and because the two of you have such a great vibe, possibly entertained as well in such a tough topic. Here's the question. Desegregation of the primarily white workplace is really important. However, if posed with only one Black candidate in the final shortlist who was less qualified, would you decide to choose that person to solve for desegregation or not? Matt, I'm going to start with President Pierce Burnette on this one.
My first question is, what is less qualified, and in whose eyes are you defining that? That's the first question, because sometimes we hide behind less qualified because we are not the same. So it's a true, honest, appropriate, respectful, direct conversation about what qualifications are we looking for. And when it comes to hiring the best, you have to be sure that you've mined the field and found all qualified candidates, and you're making a decision based on the skill sets necessary for the job, not your perception of what the best fit is. Because when people say that, well, that person is not as qualified, and then when you really start peeling the onion back, it oftentimes boils down to that individual is really not like me, and they're not going to do the job like I'm going to do the job. So qualifications are rife with bias. And if you look at the true role itself and what the person is responsible for, and no one is advocating mediocrity through desegregation. Affirmative action was designed or is designed to give people opportunities that they would not have, almost forcing you to give them an opportunity to interview. It does not encourage to be able to hire someone that's not quote unquote qualified for the position. So my first question is, you're coming at this from a position of, the quality is going to be at risk, because that's the undertone there. The quality of the organization is going to be at risk if we interview people different than ourselves. That is the undertone. And when you come from that space, that's how you operate.
I think it's also an opportunity to get curious about how do we utilize language of that nature to describe white candidates. Right. And so it's not an indictment, it's an invitation to go, how am I thinking about that? It's such an opportunity. Okay, Matt, do you want to take a stab at that question?
Sure. I'd agree with President Pierce Burnette that a lot of times when of course, it's a hypothetical question, but if you've gotten to the point where that's the issue is much deeper than that, because you're saying that you're coming at it from the wrong angle. You're not understanding the performance benefits of what a fully diverse workforce can bring to the table. And it sounds as though you're hiding behind a quantifiable, maybe pre-experiences or pre-task or pre-roles of what qualified is. And the true fully functioning, high-performing team has, uncountable, unquantifiable measures that really push teams to the winning position, the pole position. So you'd have to look at it within that matrix. What are the qualitative measures that this person is bringing to the table? But there's issues. I know there's issues in that organization much deeper than this one candidate. If you get to that point.
Thank you for that. Okay. This question's for Matt. Based on comments Dr. Pierce Burnette made earlier, what made this important for you in a corporate role and as a leader of a firm to make this part of the company's discussion rather than just a personal journey? It's a great question.
Yes. I think for myself, you have to juggle that quite a bit. Are you speaking on behalf of Parsley Energy anytime you speak? And the answer is essentially yes. And then funneling down to this issue, it's wholly ingrained, and there are no separating. When you come to work, it needs to be. I know we talked earlier that there are no safe spaces, but we're creating an environment that everybody can put forth their whole self. And otherwise, what's the point of work and the social interaction and the environmental interaction? That's something that we work on a lot at Parsley. Has to be part of the complete picture. So it has to be elevated outside of just my personal beliefs. And myself, our board, we all believe that it's important, and we have to elevate the conversation. And through our own internal lookbacks, we're not far enough down the road that as we want to be. So we have to take it. We have to add a little bit more pressure to the conversation, and we've got to elevate this.
Excellent. Okay, for each of you. Oh, take some water. This is okay. For each of you, what are your respective next steps following this reading discussion within your own team and the organizations you are responsible for? What are the next steps?
Matt and I just had a conversation off camera about the fact that the university is interested in beginning to recruit in Midland. So that is my next step, to follow up with that. We have an intern on our campus who is from that community and says that it would be a wonderful opportunity for the university to be there to market ourselves as a space to come to get a college degree with education as a great equalizer, for us to become a partner in that sense of the word. So for me, that's my natural next step, is to continue the partnership and the collaboration in that respect, where you as a prime member of the community can help to introduce the university into the Midland community.
Excellent. And you?
And for
next
us,
steps.
I think it's twofold. First, we're going to talk about the Midland education opportunity, because it's just a great community in Midland. But with our line of work, drilling oil and gas wells, there's abundant opportunity in the labor pool right out of high school. And they see dollar signs. Frankly, there's a great financial opportunity. And too often you can short circuit what's an enduring lifelong skill set through education. And the cyclicality of our industry gets overlooked when you immediately need to put food on the table or support yourselves. So I think bringing in Huston-Tillotson to this conversation can really help even the playing field. I think that's a great opportunity. We're going to move on that quickly. But the other one is internal to Parsley, and we talked about it in the Q&A, that we don't have any people of color in our middle management, in our management structure. And why is that? And it has not been an intentional enough effort. And this book really highlights some tools that you need to put in place early on in the process. And there is some sort of bias going on for that to happen. I believe that it was unintentional. We do have a great human resources team, but now we know. Okay, now we have a toolkit. So we have a couple plans already identified to me, proposals, and we're going to be pushing that effort throughout the organization. It has to happen.
I love that. So this is a great question, and it's for you, President Pierce Burnette. But Matt, I hope that you will weigh in on this, because from a how this happened perspective, the call comes in. WM, well-meaning white man calls about engaging in a conversation that we have been trained not to have, right? We don't talk about politics. You don't talk about race. You don't talk about religion. And after the onset of that meeting, there was an authenticity to President Gallagher that was noted here at HT. And so will you speak to what makes a good diversity and inclusion partner for Huston-Tillotson University?
Consistency, and not one and done. It's delivery and coming to the partnership, recognizing our strengths and our weaknesses as a university, and recognizing your own strengths and your own weaknesses as an entity, and how we can go faster together. I mean, I say this a lot. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so for me, it's that going far together, as opposed to, you've given us $1 to the COVID-19 support fund, and we never see you again. And that means that when my staff reaches out to recruit or do another something innovative or creative, and all of a sudden no one's returning our phone calls, then you're not a partner, you're not a collaborator, and it has to be reciprocal. My institution, my students do not need to be saved. They need good books, good teachers, good internships. And I do not look for partners that are missionaries to save us, because it being a reciprocal partnership means that you benefit from the institution, just like the institution benefits from the partnership. And the concept of partnership, ally, collaborator, co-conspirator, accomplice, you find your space where it fits best for it to be a collaborative, reciprocal relationship. And that's very important for me. And I've experienced the spectrum in my seat here in Austin, Texas, from the to the zero and done, to the one and done, to the long-term in this together, with education as a great equalizer, investing in your mission and investing in your students. Because when you invest, you get a return on the investment. We are not a charity. So I'm looking for people who really, truly want to invest in the mission of the institution, so that we get these long-term returns on that investment.
I love that. So Matt, talk a little bit about, as a fearless leader in this space, because it really took that. You could have read the book and put it on the shelf and gone on about your day. Talk a little bit about, what do you know about yourself now that you did not know before you read this book?
A lot of uncomfortable areas. And I think that it's okay to have those feelings and step through them, and then have an open conversation coming from the right spot about how that made you feel, or about which walls went up. And we talked about it in the Q&A about the phrase white privilege, and how that was a place I wasn't going for a while. But then reading through this book, I kind of connected as these perpetual tailwinds, and those are very evident to me. I can think back through my own personal life. So replaying that, almost I think back to sports, and you watch the tape, and how do you get better? And I watched the tape, and there's this, was there an invisible hand coming through? It might be a little bit more evident to me. So that was a learning moment. And then, man, I want everybody to have that. I want our community to be uplifted and to progress. And this country has some of the best and brightest, most courageous and resilient people on the planet. And if we can create an equal environment for them to be fostered in, let's do it. So I think just retrospective analysis of how I even got to where I was a big learning process from the book.
I love that. I love that. So I want you two to think about, as we've been on this topic, this is like a 4-Pete TED Talk extravaganza on a real hard topic. I want you to think about, from your perspective, Camps, where you sit every day as leaders, if you had to talk to your employees, students, faculty, staff, and they asked you to give them just what would be the best advice you would give them about staying in this space of being lifelong learners around things that you that are important, what advice would you give? Or is there advice that you've received that you've watched manifest in your careers? I'm being nice today. I'm going to let you answer that either way. Advice you've received that manifested itself in your career around hard conversations and topics of race and equity, or advice you'd want to give them as you continue to kind of chart this space?
From the best advice I've received, and the advice I now give, is to know your history, because it helps you understand the present, and it helps you to not repeat the history. And the more that I've studied, and the more that I've read, the more I've come to understand my own journey, the journey of my parents, the journey of my university. Even understanding the history of the institution has helped me to be a better leader. Like that's why we do family reunions, and why we go and look at our genealogy. We want to know where we come from. It helps to define us. And that's really what history does. It helps to define us. And I really emphasize that this is not about racist people. It's about dismantling racist systems. So when we, because people withdraw and say, I'm not racist, I'm not prejudiced. And, or Black people say, I'm tired of this. So when I learn my history, even voting, and I think about in my own lifetime that voting was not a right, and for all, it inspires me to continue this battle and this consistent moving forward. And another piece of advice I received is that you rarely get to taste the fruit from the trees, from the seeds that you plant. And that has been so powerful for me and encouraging me, in that I'm concerned about my children's lifetime, if I'm blessed enough to have grandchildren's lifetime. So I'm just like my grandparents were sharecroppers, and they never would have thought that their granddaughter would be a college president in a city like Austin, Texas. So if they gave up and retreated, I wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't have Matt in my life. So I want that same opportunity for my own heirs, so that if I sit in my space and retreat, I'm not doing my due diligence. It's what Muhammad Ali called service is your rent that you pay to exist on in this world. And so that encourages me, because some days I'm totally physically fatigued, and I'm a vessel. So I go to bed at night totally exhausted, and I wake up the next morning and I can't wait to get to campus, can't wait to get back into it, because I know that eventually there is a dismantling. It's what Dr. King says, that moral arc is bending towards justice. It's slow, but it is bending from pressure and heat. So.
Love it. Matt, advice, what would you say to your employee base about just like staying in this space of learning and growing?
Well, we do look for curious people, step one, and we also look for people that love to teach. But I'll give two from a prior CEO that I worked for, and then from my high school baseball coach.
Yeah.
And prior CEO, I had him quarantined, different meeting at that time, but we were sitting together waiting for a plane. And I said, what's the one piece of advice you've gotten that helped your career? And he said, there's not one piece. Everything matters and detail matters. Dang it. I was looking for something quicker than that. And then the second one ties into what my high school baseball coach told me. And it was actually gave a book about, it's called TNT, The Power Within. So another book everybody could read. And it's visualize success and see it in your mind and work towards it. So if you have these two things together and this patience, if you details matter, hard work matters, keep at it, but you have to visualize success. You know what the outcome is going to be. See it in your mind and work towards it. So those two things together, I think, can have a good outcome.
I love that. Question. The book urges people to bring their whole selves to work, but also suggests conformity to an extent. And we've touched on this a little bit, but I know people are really grappling with this. Was that one of your takeaways? And if so, how do you reconcile the two? Bringing your whole self to work, but also the book talks about the importance of kind of understanding the organizational culture and landscape as well. Who wants to take that one?
You know, you have to focus on what you're trying to achieve. And sometimes you choose to conform, to continue to work towards that success, however you're defining it. I tell my son, a Black male, the time to assert your rights is not when a police officer pulls you over. So you conform in that moment. You get his badge number, his name, you turn your cell phone on, you stay true to yourself. But in that moment, you have to make a decision of when you bring your whole self or when you conform. And I think that's the case in many places. There have been many times where I have been in a situation and I love my job, I want to keep it. So I might want to have some choice words for someone on how I could tell that they're treating me differently because I'm a Black woman. But in that moment, I have to think through what my strategy will be to get to the long-term results, which is what I'm trying to get to. And inevitably, it always comes back and have an opportunity. We had someone who did not want to park their Tesla on our campus. And now we are having a partnership with Tesla. So my reaction when they didn't want to park their Tesla on campus because of some, I don't know, was I want to be a girl from Cleveland. But that wouldn't have been effective. However, then full circle, now I have the opportunity as an institution to partner with Tesla. So that gets worked out in a way I never could have worked it out. So I have to choose when I conform and stay true to myself so that I'm effective in the moment and not ineffective because of the way that I've acted in that moment. And I think it's a hard space to find that.
Absolutely. Okay, Matt, you want to wrangle that whole self at work versus the book does sit on that intersection of bring your whole self, but navigate the culture.
Everybody needs a rev limiter, right?
Yeah, right.
Everybody needs a rev limiter. So I think that, and in the work environment, you really have to be conscious of the rev limiter. And so I take it as we're in a social media universe where things happen quick. Even the movies we watch are 2 hours long, but a career is your life. So don't get caught up in these moments and feel defeated and box yourself in with words like conform and I didn't do my duty at that point and I left some of my dignity on the table. Those will trap you into these flare-up moments, and then people have a harder time really having a discussion with you. And how effective is that? You might win that one battle, but the war becomes much tougher. So I'd agree. You just have to. There's moments where yes, you can live under the label of conformity. They talk about them in the book, about that rev limiter, and just work through it pragmatically, and you'll have your moments. Speak clearly. Corrections are fine, but just don't blow the teapot type of thing.
Okay. I think we have a couple more minutes here. One more question. Please discuss the following quote from the book. In fact, 40% of white Americans and 25% of non-white Americans have no friends outside of their own race. How can we make a change?
That's something that people have to consciously do. I spoke at the MLK March here in Austin, and I said that at that march, go to a family different than yours. So as you're marching, consciously say someone a different age bracket, a different race, a different ethnicity, someone who doesn't have English as their first language, but you have to consciously say and just go and strike up a conversation. So because you have to be authentic about it. You're not looking for, as the concept of the token friend. You have to be authentic about it, and it's something that you have to consciously do. And it might not be at a march. It might be a book club you join. It might be a church you attend as a visitor. It might be at your child's school, at the PTA, where you sit next to someone who looks a little different than you do, and you engage. And your children will model that as well. And you have to just consciously put yourself in spaces where you are not surrounded by everyone just like yourself. And we all have opportunities to do that. And it's funny because we don't think about it as we just go through our day-to-day lives, that we're just surrounded by people who look just like us until you're not in that space. And then it becomes very obvious that you're not in that space. But when you're in the minority, you don't think about it that way. And sometimes if you're in the minority all the time, and sometimes it's good just to kind of be with people that are like yourself. So it's not that's just not a one-way street. It's like music. Sometimes I just want to go listen to music that I like, but it stretches me to go and listen to music that's different than what I generally surround myself with. And that stretches you as a person. And I really want to emphasize that we are more alike than we are different. I mean, Matt and I were both engineers. We were just having these conversations about our marriages, our children, things we do for fun. And you don't know that unless you engage with the person. Because if I just was on Congress Avenue and I was walking in, or if I was in a store and I saw Matt, I would think that's a white guy that's nothing like me. And because we have a conversation about it, and that's when barriers start to be dismantled, because you realize the humanity in each of us. And if once we connect at a human level, then those fears and those stereotypes and those biases, that anxiety, it really starts to fall away.
I love that. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to get this last question in. No question will conquer my list. This last one asked, how did this partnership between the two come to be? Why did you choose this collaboration? Matt, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. So we started our company in Midland, Texas, and we tried to, we were headquartered there, and we tried to be involved with the community. We moved to Austin in 2014, and we've been dipping our toe in different types of community outreach, mostly in the healthcare. And then we've been wanting to focus on STEM and educational outreach. And then you have this confluence this summer, and we talked about the bubbling up and the emotional impact of showing on video something that people have been trying to say isn't as bad as it is anymore. and here's an opportunity. I did not know this school was here this summer. And here's an opportunity that meets the confluence of all the items that we want to stand for and be partners in: community, education, STEM, and now let's talk about the social situation and how can we chip away at that. So we called and we thought that, hey, here's an opportunity. It's an opportunity that couldn't be more perfect for what we were looking for. Is there a willingness on the other side, and what could be a next step? And just the immediate response from both of you all, and then you add COVID on top of that, and there's an immediate need, and then there's emotional impacts from COVID and the different strains that the student body has to face across all educational platforms. So it was really fortuitous in that respect, and I'm just really happy to be here. I think we're at the beginning of lifelong friendships, and looking forward to that, and looking forward to all that will come from this.
Well, we are at time. I want to thank both of you for being in shared space. This happens often. The president is going to have the last word.
I just know, I don't want the last, I just want to say one thing. I saw Andrew Young speak, and he said that there are no, Ambassador Young, he said there are no coincidences. Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. And I don't think we chose the collaboration. I think the collaboration chose us.
Yep.
And I think the collision of coincidences, the people who work in the spaces that work in your organization and my organization, are what makes this happen.
Yep.
And I think the collaboration chose us. And as on behalf of my campus community, I'm super appreciative for the opportunity.
Likewise.
No more words needed. Thank you for being with us. This is not the end of the conversation. It really is the beginning. Go have courageous conversations. Thank you.